Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Nocturnity. Tonight we have 5 first-hand accounts of drug deals gone horribly wrong for you. These are intense, real-life horror stories, some of them really intense, so consider this your fair warning. Now, let us waste no more time and dive headfirst into the dark recesses of the realm of eternal night. For a while there, me and a couple friends were getting away with passing fake $10 bills off around town. That is, until we decided to buy some acid with a couple of them. The catch was, we bought it through a connect, meaning we gave the money, or fake money, to an acquaintance of ours at school who knew a dealer, and he went and picked it up for us, not knowing he was paying with counterfeit cash. He came back a little later with the acid, and me and my buddies dropped it that night and had a wild time. However, the next day, it was all over town that the guy we'd given the fake bills to pick up the acid for us was found in a ditch, brutally stabbed to death. His killer was never caught, and the 3 of us have had to live with the suspicion ever since that we were responsible for what happened to him. Me and my group of friends used to buy weed from a guy a few years older than us when we were in the 10th grade. One time when we were picking up from him, he let us know that he also sold mushrooms if we ever wanted to try some of those. So, that weekend we all made plans to trip out and called him up. He was partying at the time at a house by the fitness plaza, and I could tell on the phone that he was drunk, but he said he had the shrooms on him and told us he could meet behind the aquatic center. That was quite a walk from where we were, and it was cold, but you gotta do what you gotta do. So 6 of us trekked it over there and picked them up. Me, 3 girls, and 2 other guys. And no sooner than our drunk dealer disappeared around the corner after the deal was done, another guy, around his age, came out of a bush with a gun in his hand and told us all not to move. Now, for the record, we were suburban kids, but our town wasn't any Pleasantville. It had its fair share of crimes, but none of us had ever seen a gun in real life before, so you can imagine how bad this freaked us all out. He then demanded we hand over the drugs we'd just bought, and so we did right away. But lo and behold, to mine and everyone else's amazement, as soon as he turned around to leave, one of the friends I was with just happened to be carrying a bandana with a lock hooked around it, and took it out of his jacket pocket and swung it as hard as a baseball bat at the back of the guy's head, connecting with an extremely loud crack when it made contact with his temple. He hit the deck and immediately began convulsing on the ground while blood flowed out of his head onto the cold concrete. It was quite easily the ugliest thing that I'd ever seen. It was so over-the-top crazy that we didn't even go to grab the bag of mushrooms on the ground beside him. We just took off running as fast as we could, and basically maintained that speed until we got back to the house we'd originally left from like 25 minutes later, huffing and puffing as we fell in through the door. Not long after that, cops were at the door. Long story short, our dealer and his buddy, both drunk as hell at that party by the aquatic center, had pulled that exact scheme on a bunch of different groups of his younger customers that night. He'd sell that same bag of shrooms to each one, and his buddy would rob the kids to get it back. Unfortunately for them, they tried it on one of the craziest kids in our grade, my friend, who will remain nameless. And unfortunately for all of us, a few of those groups of kids robbed at gunpoint called the police, and that all led to them tracing the assault back to us. And even worse, our dealer's friend suffered serious brain damage he could never recover from, and our friend was arrested for doing it to him. He tried to claim self-defense, but it was proven that the blow came from behind in court, and he was punished severely. And the kicker is that the gun that the guy was using to rob people that night was a realistic-looking BB gun. All of that over a bag of shrooms. My 17th birthday was in the millennium year of 2000, and it happened to fall on the first night of a 72-hour rave in Detroit's Hart Plaza, which me and my best friend Jay scored tickets to. Our plan was to pop ecstasy throughout the whole festival and party until the sun came up each day. Stupid, I know, but we were young and dumb. But a problem came up when our dealer got busted a few days before the party, so we were kinda stuck. At first we thought of buying some caps there, but decided against it because even back then, people were overdosing at raves after taking bad E, so we knew we had to get it from a trusted source. And by some sort of luck, well, at least we considered it luck at the time, we came into contact with our dealer's dealer, whose name, and I'm serious, was Phantom, and ended up stopping at his apartment on our way to the plaza to pick up a big bag of little green pills. So we hopped off the bus and walked over to his building, buzzed up, went up the rickety elevator to his door and knocked, pretty excited because we'd been anticipating this party for months, and we were now only one bus away. But as soon as we stepped inside his place, our moods drastically changed. This was a definite drug den. It was really dark. The only actual lights in the place were crudely strung Christmas lights and a bunch of candles. Cigarette smoke was thick in the air, and there were about 4 or 5 guys sitting on couches and chairs, a couple of them yelling while they passionately played Super Nintendo to 9 Inch Nails music rattling through some cheap, treble-y speakers. These guys were obvious tweakers. I would bet my life they were meth heads. And maybe it was the paranoid, ready-to-snap way they looked at us, but I've never walked into a place and physically felt the sense of tense danger that I did that day. I wanted to just grab my drugs and get the hell out of there. So because I'd only talked to the dealer on the phone earlier, I quickly got down to business and asked which one of them was Phantom. This prompted one of the tweakers on the couch to immediately jump up and yell, "Who the fuck wants to know?" And I was sure he was going to attack us and tear out our guts with his long, dirty fingernails, if it wasn't for one of the guys on an armchair playing Nintendo telling him to shut up and sit down. As it turns out, that was Phantom. The other guy listened and took a seat, but kept his eyes on us with a belligerent scowl on his face. The type of look you can tell is inviting a confrontation, searching for one. Now, more than ever, I wanted to get the fuck out of there. The vibe in that crack shack was thick with tension. Without taking his attention off his video games, Phantom then told us to put the money on the table. So Jay stepped over there and did exactly that, prompting that same nut job on the couch to jolt as the money was put down, as if he was ready to jump up and attack him like a guard dog. Jay quickly stepped back beside me by the door, that sketchy son of a bitch glaring at us with no pause. "What the fuck are you looking at?" he then seethed at us. We just kind of stood there startled. Phantom, still wrapped up in his game, once again told him to shut his mouth. "I don't like the look of this guy," the guy returned. "He's up to some shit." He then leaned over the filthy coffee table in front of him and began desperately scanning it with his eyes while he moved the garbage on top of it around with his hands and began yelling about his pack of smokes not being there. I glanced at Jay, who looked completely terrified, and then all of a sudden, at that very moment, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the guy jump up off the couch and come at us at full speed. Before I knew it, he'd slashed at Jay with an X-Acto knife, slitting his forearm wide open before pinning him against the door with his meth head arm wedged across Jay's throat. I grabbed onto the guy, but I couldn't move him. He felt like his whole body was flexed to the point of turning to stone. But soon enough, Phantom was prying him off and yelling at him to calm down again. "This kid stole my fucking smokes!" the tweaker started shouting as soon as him and Jay were separated. Phantom looked at Jay as if he believed that nonsense. "I swear I didn't touch them," Jay croaked. Another raspy voice then came from the couch saying, "Your smokes are right here, Barry." We all looked back to see one of the other tweakers holding up a bent-out-of-shape package of cigarettes. "You were sitting on them," he announced. Instead of walking over there to grab them, though, the tweaker, who we now knew was named Barry, pointed his cracky finger right in Jay's face. "This kid's a rat, Phantom. Both of them. We can't let him leave with that arm. They're gonna go right to the cops. We gotta do them both right now." Phantom suspiciously looked at Jay, and the blood literally spilling out of his wounded arm, and then at me, up and down. And then he got right up in Jay's face, backing him right up against the door again. "You gonna rat?" he asked angrily. The other tweakers rose from their seats and started approaching. I was now shitting bricks. "No," Jay answered, shaking his head. "These kids are fucking rats!" Barry wailed once again as he extended the blade out of his box cutter. "Let's fucking do them right now!" The tension had mounted so thick by that point, I was sure the only outcome was going to be a bloodbath. "Look," I found myself yelling, "neither of us are rats. We came here to buy E for the rave we're going to. You can keep the money. Just let us go to the party and we'll forget all of this ever happened." Suddenly I felt every eye now looking at me, and only me. Phantom sized me up through his squinted eyes and reached into his pocket, pulled something out, and shoved it into the center of my chest. I looked down, expecting to see a stream of blood, but instead saw a baggie of pills. "Get the fuck out of here," he then commanded coldly. "What?" his minion Barry cried as he stepped towards Jay, but Phantom put his arm out and stopped him like the owner of a trained mutt. That was our cue. I opened the door handle and we got the hell out of there, thanking God we were able to. And you'd think that would have taught us to smarten up, to go home and reconsider our life choices. But nope. We hit the hospital so Jay could get a few stitches and then hit the rave. Like I said, young and dumb. My senior class were no strangers to coke. It wasn't just being used at parties either. We were doing it all the time. There were a few dealers in the school, but a bunch of us came across a contact one time that apparently had the purest stuff we'd ever get our hands on. Rockstar shit. So we called him and made a huge order. There were like 50 of us throwing our money together. Of course, 50 of us couldn't all go to pick it up, and I guessed I was the most trustworthy among us because I was elected to do it. So, one Friday evening, I arranged to meet the guy in a path behind the school, where a lot of drug deals typically went down in those days, and showed up to see him already there with some other guy I'd never met. We got right down to business. He handed me the biggest sack of blow I'd ever seen in my life. One big baggie full of a whole bunch of smaller baggies, as we asked for it to be separated into grams. But before I could hand the money over to him, a yell came from the end of the path that emptied out into a cul-de-sac. And yes, you guessed it. It was the cops. And it only gets worse, because when I turned to look to the other end of the path that emptied out into the school parking lot, there was even more cops there. We were surrounded, with nowhere to run. But it gets even worse. Keep in mind that I hadn't handed this guy the money yet. So that meant that I had a big stack of cash on me and a big bag of coke separated into gram baggies. So guess who the cops thought the dealer was? And I'm sure you know there was no chance the guy was going to say, "No, officer, I'm the cocaine dealer, not him." Of course not. He told the cops he'd come to pick up half a gram from me right when they showed up. The next year of my life was full of jail time, court battles, lawyers, and dealings with the law that I'd wish on no 17-year-old. It was a living hell. All because I was the most trustworthy one in our senior class. How's that for irony? Back in high school, like throughout the entire 5 years of grades 8 through 12, I was the person to know if you wanted weed in Richfield, Utah. And because of this, I got accustomed to a few things. First off, the money I was making, which was plenty. Secondly, I was used to always having weed on hand to smoke whenever I wanted, which was a morning till night occurrence. So when I got into UCLA, it was like a shock to the system. I no longer had a bottomless sack of weed, and I no longer had a stream of cash coming in. My whole lifestyle was upended. So, to remedy my situation, I asked around until I found the plug on campus. And when I met him, took a good look at him, because I knew this was the guy I was about to be putting out of business. I asked him for a pound right off the bat, and he told me he didn't sell that much, obviously, but that he could put me in contact with his guy. So, I called the number that he'd written on a scrap piece of paper for me and set up a time to meet this guy. I didn't know LA that well, so I called a cab. The look on that driver's face when I told him the crossroads should have been my first indication that something wasn't right. After taking a good look at me, a clean-cut white boy who had small town written all over his face, he repeated the streets, as if to say, "Did I just hear you right?" I confirmed, and after a headshake, he put it in gear, and we were en route. 45 minutes later, I realized what caused his initial reaction. We were in the hood, South Central Los Angeles, literal gangsters on their front porches looking at us go by. Finally, he stopped out front of a house and told me we were there. I said I wouldn't be long, and told him to keep the meter running as I exited the vehicle, but he refused and told me to pay up, and fast. I could see by the look in his eyes that there wouldn't be any argument over it. As he saw it, sitting in that particular neighborhood, a guy working a job where you were known to have money on you was asking for serious trouble. "All right," I said as I handed him my credit card for the fare, "but I want you to come back in 10 minutes. You're not getting your tip until I'm back at the campus." And to that he agreed, and then pulled away. But before I could walk into the house's front yard, another car pulled up in his place. Inside were 3 rough-looking individuals, 2 in the back and 1 in the driver's seat. The guy in the back passenger side asked who I was, and then told me to get in. So, as nervous as all hell, I did. As we drove down the block, I asked where we were going, and was told by the same guy in the back, who I was now worried was going to suddenly wrap piano wire around my throat, told me they had the product in the trunk, but weren't about to hand it to me in the middle of the street, and soon enough, we were pulling in behind a park. After we all got out, they took me around to the trunk and opened it up. I expected to see the weed, but it was empty. And before I could say a word, I felt the cold barrel of a gun as it pressed up to the back lower portion of my head. Out of instinct, I put my hands kind of up by my sides to show I wasn't going to try anything funny and asked what was going on. The only response I got was a cold order to get inside the trunk as the gun pushed harder into the back of my head, guiding me towards it. I asked what was going on again, and a couple of them grabbed me and then forced me inside of it. The last thing I saw was the 3 of them looking down at me, the one with the gun still pointing it at me, and then the trunk slamming shut. I'd never had a panic attack before, but as that car began to drive, the severity of the situation fizzed up inside of me and I started to hyperventilate, and probably would have passed out if it wasn't for the surging adrenaline coursing through my entire system. Either way, minutes later the car came to a stop, and a few moments after that the trunk was popped again. This time there were a lot more guys looking in at me. Right away, 2 arms from 2 different guys were reaching in and pulling me out, and I was thrown to the ground. And while I was on my hands and knees, I then realized we were in some sort of abandoned building. But I wasn't given any time to take in the surroundings, as a hard kick came out of the mess of people surrounding me, striking me right in the rib cage, and I fell face down on the ground, writhing and wheezing in pain. Someone told me to get up, so I gathered all the will that I had to slowly stand up to my feet. It was then that I saw a face that stood out from the rest. Unlike the others, this was no gangster from South Central. This was that same guy that I'd asked for weed back at UCLA. The same dealer who'd given me the number to meet these guys in the first place. When we made eye contact, he grinned and asked, "You think I'm going to let you cut my grass, freshman?" I wasn't given a chance to answer, though. As soon as he'd finished speaking, one of the others pointed his pistol at my face and told me to strip. I looked around at the semicircle of cold faces staring back at me, confused as to what I'd been told to do. Did he tell me to strip? I was mystified. Like, take all my clothes off? Suddenly a bullet ricocheted off the ground beside me, the blast from the gun echoing off of the walls like a barrage of radio static, quickly followed by the same order to strip being shouted at me. I didn't even think about it. Before I knew it, I was ripping my clothes off and within a few moments was completely naked in front of these guys. While the one with the gun kept it pointed at me, One of the others grabbed my clothes and rifled through the pockets until he found the envelope I'd brought full of $100 bills, 20 of them in total. "You sell even a nickel bag at that school of yours, and we're gonna have a big problem," the one with the gun told me. "Now I'm gonna count to 10, and if you ain't out of that door and running home by the time I finish, you're gonna be one dead motherfucker. 1, 2, 3... With already only a few seconds left to spare, I turned around and ran at full speed for the first door I saw, hearing the number 8 as I crashed through it into an alley and kept on running. In no time, they all passed me in a few cars, honking their horns and yelling out their windows. I was like a wild animal lost in the city at that point, naked, terrified, and completely unaware of what direction to go. So I just kept running through arguably the most dangerous area in all of America, until, thankfully not long after I'd left the warehouse, I heard the chirp of a police car behind me. I had completely run out of gas by that point and collapsed onto the alley floor, huffing and puffing. After being interrogated by the police for a while, wrapped in a blanket back at the station, they sympathized with the fact that I'd been robbed and, out of fear of my own safety, wasn't willing to cooperate with identifying who was behind it. I told them that I just wanted to go back to my dorm and never return to that part of town again. And out of pity, they gave me a jogging suit and arranged for a cab ride back to campus. That was over 10 years ago now, and still stands as the last drug deal I ever petitioned. I did the next 4 years in college without so much as a contact high. It may sound lame, but let's see you go through what I did that day and then tell me you can look at a bag of weed without PTSD. Truth be told, those guys scared me straight. Well, my friends, we've made it out of Nocturnity once again still intact, but only just. I hope you enjoyed the ride, and moreover, hope you avoid taking part in any drug deals of your own. It's a dangerous world out there. That being said, you can do some good right now by giving this video a like, and if you want to go the extra mile, a share. We have many more stories on the way for you, so if you haven't yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and guarantee you're in the loop when our next broadcast is released. Until then, my friends, stay safe.